So let the record reflect that all the members are present. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:35. And we'll begin the meeting with the moment of silence. Now if the members will rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so the first item on our agenda is revisions to the agenda. I'll note that last month we had voted to table changes to the policy manual related to ends policies that we're supposed to vote on at this meeting. We've, on reflection, at least it's been suggested that we table that discussion further so that it can be the subject of our retreat. And so it's not on the agenda. Are there any objections to that? Okay, next, the minutes. It's presented in the board packet. Trying to find the date of this minutes for the regular meeting on July 17. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, so they'll be printed as presented. And I think those are the only, we also have minutes from the Taxpayer Bill of Rights hearing on the 17th. Okay. Moving on, the first item on our agenda is public comment. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have two speakers, Marilyn Richterick and Matt Bulch. And I think each will have 5 minutes each for public comment. Oh, I should remind you that our meetings are now taped. I don't remember if they're actually videotaped,
They are videotaped.
but they're videotaped and recorded, so, okay.
We have signs on the doors, don't we?
I know you'll be voting later tonight on the school calendar for the next couple of years. And a lot of parents are concerned about the fact that the school year will be dragging on into June. Traditionally in the city of Decatur, we've always gotten out before Memorial Day. And this is very important to parents. This is one of the few holidays that everyone has. People like to plan trips around that time. And this ruins that for a lot of families and kids. And, it's not like the kids are going to be learning a lot of stuff in those few days after Memorial Day. It's not prime instructional time. But we certainly, my husband and I certainly feel that travel is one of the most educational things we do with our son. This past year, for example, we flew to Spain the day after school got out, that Saturday before Memorial Day. It's a lot cheaper to fly at that time. It's less crowded. It's less hot. We start school in this district on the 1st of August. That's the earliest I've ever heard of any school district starting anywhere. And, the payoff for that has always been, well, you get out early. You get out before Memorial Day. And that is something that parents value tremendously. And I think the only reason you're not hearing more about that from people tonight is that they didn't know it was happening. Last year was a very weird year, between power outages and flu epidemics and ice storms. I've lived in this area since 1995, and there were a couple of years when we had ice storms, okay, and that would knock out 3 or 4 days. I don't remember any other day, any other year remotely like that. So to make this adjustment to the calendar in the anticipation that that's going to be a regular thing would be extremely ill-advised. You know, you're going to have a lot of very upset parents when they figure out what's going on. And it just, you know, we've got the number of mandated days and some to spare. So there's really no need to do this. So just wanted to register that, and I hope you'll take that into account as you're casting your votes on this agenda item tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, and I'm Matt Bolch. I'm married to her, however that works. And I did not find out about this until yesterday. I'm here to make the points that she might have forgotten. I put it up out to next door to the neighborhood to say, hey, do y'all know about this? And you should have gotten some letters and some comments. There have been about a dozen, one way or the other. My only question, you know, I understand, you know, instructional time and all of that. That's, you know, fantastic. And you obviously we're here in the city of Decatur, in the school district, for a very important reason for our kids. You know, that's why we moved to Decatur. That's why a lot of people move to Decatur. Fully understand that. But I'm not sure that the parents were aware that this was going on. I think if it was publicized a little more widely and you've actively solicited comments since you're trying to lock it in for the next 2 years, that might be something that parents would have issue with. The summer season, you know, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we fully accept that Labor Day is out for any significant travel, but to also carve out Memorial Day when, as my wife said, we start and then travel extensively that you can't do during a week break. We don't go to Europe for a week. It doesn't make sense for us. By the time you get there, you fly overnight, you have to fly back. 7 days or 9 days becomes, you know, 8 or 7. And it's not really enough to experience what we want our child to experience. And so it is my sincere hope that you'll think about this, maybe delay it, and seek some more public input, because it's very important to the parents and to the children of the school district. So thank y'all all very much for what you do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the superintendent's comment.
I will save my comments for the next meeting.
Next is the chair's report, and I don't have a chair's report, but I did want to congratulate you and your entire staff, Mr. Maloof, and everybody else who's had a hand in a very successful opening and start to the school year. It's rare that we open the school year and hear so little about it from the board perspective.
That's a good sign.
And so this is a very successful start, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Next is strategic priorities.
Dr. Huddleston has a presentation for us.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Duty. I'd like to start this presentation with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. Let's see if the clicker's working.
He's coming. Awesome.
All right, let's get going. I feel as though this quote really captures the magnitude of our educational equity work. All labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence. So this evening, I'll provide you with a brief update on the Equity Action Plan and the current CCEIS plan. Then I will review equity-focused activities from the beginning of the school year, as well as next steps for the Equity Department. As I described in the June board meeting, we have completed a draft of the Equity Action Plan based on the feedback and recommendations associated with the Equity Needs Assessment. The 3 core areas of the plan are focused on cultural humility and orientation towards understanding culture, curriculum and instruction with a focus on culturally responsive teaching, and equitable policies and procedures. I presented a draft for your review and feedback at the June meeting, and in July, the plan was presented at the superintendent staff retreat. School leaders participated in a process to review, ask questions, and provide input. During the retreat, school teams worked on aligning elements of the Equity Action Plan to their school improvement plans. And we're currently finalizing the next iteration of the Equity Action Plan, which will be distributed widely in September. So now we'll transition into an update of the CCEIS plan, which covers plans for the second year of implementation. As we've discussed in previous meetings, the Georgia Department of Education conducts an annual review of our disaggregated data related to identification, placement, and discipline for students receiving special education services. Based on this review, we were determined to have significantly disproportionate discipline outcomes based on race. As a result, the state requires us to review our policies and procedures and practices, as well as develop, implement, and monitor a plan designed to prevent disproportionality. We implemented a plan last year at Decatur High School, which included the Mindfulness Ambassador Program and Check and Connect. We will continue both interventions at the high school, and we'll also add up to 10 students at Renfro Middle School with Check and Connect.
May I interrupt just to clarify
Sure.
or to request clarification? The plan, so is this comprehensive coordinated early intervening services, is that like what the law requires, that if you have significant disproportionality and discipline, you need to have a CEIS plan? Is that the way it works?
Correct.
And so the CEIS plan is only for Decatur High School, but not district-wide?
So the CEIS plan, we were able to select an area that would represent about 15% of the population. So it's not for the whole district, because you take 15% of the special education budget and you make a plan that is in proportion to the students that you have.
Okay. And, okay. And so this, in the Decatur High School here, this is the CEIS plan for Decatur High School that you're talking about, that's the Mindfulness
Mindfulness Ambassador
Ambassador.
Program,
Okay.
and Check and Connect. And it's
And
the same.
The
Oh,
reason it's focused at the high school and now the middle school is because that's where the majority of our discipline events occur.
Okay. That was all clear, but it helps me just to ask instead of waiting to ask, so,
Sure.
thank you.
Sure.
So, quick question on the weekly monitoring of discipline data. When was that implemented?
So, as a part of the CEIS plan last year, there was a component of monitoring the data, and we had weekly meetings with the team, which included our student engagement coach, our high school graduation coach, the special education director, and myself. And so we did that last year. This year, in addition to that, we'll have a group of other individuals at the central office, including our executive director of schools, Heidi Watley, and Bruce Roden, and we're looking at the discipline for the whole district, as well as our students who are participating in this intervention.
Okay, wonderful, thank
The
you.
first one of those just happened. I just got the update today.
Awesome.
Can you go into a little bit more, I know I'm further interrupting your presentation, but since we're here, can you go into a little bit more detail about what the Mindfulness Ambassador Program is, as well as Check and Connect?
Sure. So as a part of the CEIS plan, we're asked to identify evidence-based interventions that will help to prevent children having multiple referrals over the year. So Check and Connect is a program that has a great deal of evidence in terms of really working with students who are at risk for having discipline concerns. And it involves having a mentor, a coach who is at the school who connects with each student who is identified in the program on a weekly basis to set goals about looking at their attendance, their behavior, their course completion, setting goals each week in terms of how they want to improve their behavior and other data that's associated with discipline. And in addition to that, this person would also be in touch with the family. So they have check-ins monthly with the family members to really make sure that we have a very strong school-to-home connection to know if there are any other ways that we can support the student. In addition to that, the person who is conducting the intervention for us is Jennifer Young. She actually meets with multiple school teams to prevent concerns with students, to share any information that will be helpful in supporting the students who are involved. And so this is a program that many school districts have used and have done school-wide to provide support for students. The Mindfulness Ambassador Program is a program that was developed by Mindfulness Without Borders, which is an organization in Canada. And there is a great deal of emerging research about the use of mindfulness to really reduce implicit bias, to really help with self-regulation and things of that nature. And so we're using this really sort of twofold. So a number of our teachers were able to be trained in this program, and it really forms a circle. We use a circle that's like a restorative circle. So when you hear us talk about restorative practices, it uses a format that's similar to that, with weekly meetings during the advisement time at the high school. So the group of students who were selected to participate will actually be meeting, and they form this ambassador council, and they're able to learn mindfulness techniques as well as connect about things that are going on and really form a connection with other adults in the school as well as their peers that are very positive.
And how do we determine who, how do we identify the students who can participate in the Check and Connect in the Mindfulness Ambassador Program?
So as a part of coming up with our coordinated plan, we developed a rubric. And the rubric includes looking at attendance, behavior, course completion, looking at number of days of ISS and OSS from the previous year. And we determined a cutoff score, looking at the overall school data, and then we selected the students who are at the top of that list. So the first 20 would be eligible at the high school, the first 10 or so would be eligible at the middle school using the rubric. There's a slightly different cutoff number at the middle school just because of grading and that kind of thing.
So did I understand you, I may have misunderstood you, are there only 20 kids that are participating in the Check and Connect program?
Correct, at the high school, up to 20.
And 10 kids that are in the Mindfulness Ambassador Program?
Mhm.
And why is that? Is it a funding problem?
No, with this particular program, we are really they look at the size of your district, and the funding comes from the special education budget, and so it's looking at about 15% of the funds, so we're looking at having a number of students that we would really be able to implement this with the amount of funds with fidelity. And so we determined that this involves hiring a whole staff person. And that would be the number that she could manage within the budget that we would have for this project. In some larger districts, often you'll have more kids who are involved.
So it's Check and Connect. This is a planned program. It's not, it sounds great, but it's something that you're going to implement this year, or?
Yes, we implemented it last year and will be continuing. And so last year, 4 of us from the team went to Minnesota and had an extensive training on Check and Connect. And our student engagement coach was also able to participate with DeKalb County, which had a large number of individuals who were implementing for monthly professional learning.
And you must have then, I mean, did it work? I mean, you must have some sense that you had success with, how many kids were in it last year?
So last year we had 20 students participating in both mindfulness and Check and Connect, and we had an additional 5 students who were Check and Connect only. And last year, we had some successes. We also had some students who already had significant numbers of referrals, and so we didn't see the needle move a great deal with them. We discussed as a team whether or not we wanted to continue with this intervention or to switch to something else. But in terms of looking at the literature on Check and Connect, typically you would have 3 or more years of implementation before you would expect to see a significant change. It is our hope that next year we're not on this list for disproportionate outcomes, but our advisor from the state said that it's very rare that a school district would come off the list in 1 year. So we wanted to, because we did see some positive outcomes, and especially with the Mindfulness Ambassador Program and students coming together and forming connections, we wanted to continue that, to give us an opportunity to really have it be fully implemented and really deeply ingrained there in high school.
That makes good sense. Should we,
I'm sorry, can I ask another question? I'm sorry for interrupting, but it seems like this is the part where you might be able to explain for me. So I like both of those programs and the ideas of them, and they seem to be more focused on, finding the student who may be at high risk or getting in trouble. But if we've determined that there is disproportionality and that our students are being punished, they're being punished harsher than their white students, then where are we kind of dealing with that component? Are we monitoring maybe teachers who are sending Black students to the office more? Because I want to make sure that there's a balance between just focusing on a potential problem child and also the other areas that are a problem, and making sure that we're monitoring who is doing the thing. I mean, because I think it's kind of hard when we look at the numbers. Those numbers are children, and those numbers are continuing to happen. And so I just want to make sure we're not just saying, let's help the kids that are in trouble, but are we also helping the teachers that tend to be the repeat offenders? And I know we have amazing teachers, so I'm definitely not saying that there's this overhaul that we need to do, but I want to recognize that we are working on both sides of that, and that we're not just saying it's the kids we need to help. Does that make
course.
sense?
Absolutely, and we're definitely working on both sides.
Okay.
I did want to just mention that for this particular program, there are some guidelines about how we can use the funds.
Okay,
And the
right.
funds have to directly support students.
Absolutely, I get that
However, we have a number of different things that we're doing, such as the weekly monitoring with our team here at the central office. We're also, if you recall from the Equity Action Plan with the cultural humility piece, we're providing support for staff members in terms of looking at implicit bias and things of that nature. And in addition to that, there are many other programs that individual schools will be doing to support. So with our check-in here, we are going down to the individual student. I'm starting to learn names. I have the students in my head, and also looking at the teachers and looking at what's going on there, as well as making sure that our administrators have the support they need to make a shift from the traditional way that we've addressed discipline, moving into more restorative practices. And I'll speak a little bit more about that a little
Thank
later
you.
in the
I'll
presentation.
just give you a quick example, Tasha, that fits exactly what you're talking about. We just had a conversation today of an interaction between a teacher and a student, and the student got a discipline and should have gotten a discipline because it was a very inappropriate action the student took. But what we're doing now is reflecting on, are there things the teacher could have done to de-escalate the situation so it never got to the point that that student had to be disciplined? And so every time one of those things happens now, we're looking at every single incident much more carefully. And that's what those weekly meetings are about. They talk about every single discipline event that has occurred and why did it occur and does someone need to be followed up with and exactly where with that. So we're all on the same page that it's not just a student problem, that it may be like Dr. Huddleston said, something to do with our culture. Like that's where the cultural humility piece comes in the equity plan. So we definitely are not looking at it as only a student problem.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
I do have one question, because I know you have other areas of the presentation you want to get onto. This is focused on this one. It sounds like a good plan being implemented. I've been in this chair when we were in this position before, and we're in this position again. And what I want to know is when the 15% is no longer mandated to go towards these types of programs, and I'm not particularly anointing one prescribed program as the program, but what are we, I just want to make sure that we're learning from what we're doing so that we sustain it in a way that doesn't get us back to this point again.
No, absolutely, we're on the same page. If we are seeing the success that we want to see from a program like this and the funding goes away, then you'll see us talking about figuring out where that funding's gonna get covered, so.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay, so next we'll move on to a discussion of some of our beginning of school activities. So this year we kicked off school with an equity focus. Superintendent staff retreat attendees participated in interactive sessions related to educational equity, in addition to providing input on the Equity Action Plan. We highlighted the role of educational equity in all aspects of our work at the new hire orientation and at an interdepartmental network meeting, as well as opening day, which some of you were able to attend. Our keynote speaker for opening day, Anthony Galloway, which many of you remember from Beyond Diversity, provided the charge for the year with the entire staff with his message on organizational change for equity. As a part of the superintendent's staff session related to the Equity Action Plan, we asked attendees to talk a little bit about what excited them about the plan. And here are some of their comments. So people were very excited that culturally responsive teaching was involved and that we had a comprehensive approach, that it included training 100% of the staff, and that we were also looking at increasing and maintaining staff diversity and looking at other elements of our work such as RTI in the plan. As a part of the new teacher orientation, we asked teachers to review our educational equity definition and to look at our equity beliefs and then reflect on how they would bring this into their work. And these are some of the comments that new staff members shared. So they wanted to go forward with modeling inclusiveness, listening and reflecting. So really being the change in their classroom and being very intentional about what they're doing with regards to educational equity. Striving for consistency, but being able to acknowledge, areas where they needed to make some changes or to learn more. Really putting equity at the center of lesson planning, and definitely including self-awareness and self-reflection in their work. I also wanted to share the standard from our afternoon session with Mr. Galloway. Equity leaders learned about the process of organizational change for racial equity and they were introduced to several tools and processes to facilitate staff engagement to address adaptive and technical challenges. So people who attended were able to leave with things to go back to their staff to help develop capacity, to really make sure that the school leaders are ready to use the lens of race and intersectionality to really create change in their buildings. So now we'll move on to next steps for the Equity Department. Our next steps will be to finalize and roll out the Equity Action Plan. We're beginning our monthly district equity team meetings and quarterly advisory team meetings again in September. We'll have several district-sponsored professional learning opportunities this year that are aligned with the goals and objectives of the Equity Action Plan. We'll be offering a book study on culturally relevant teaching in the brain by Zaretta Hammond, and we're really excited that right now we're negotiating with her to come and be our speaker for the opening day for January. So we're getting very close to that, so that ties in with the curriculum and instruction part of the Equity Action Plan. We are also working on setting up professional learning related to restorative practices for counselors and administrators this school year. So just to summarize some of the things we've touched on today, I'll share this graphic with a timeline. And it shows when we've started the action plan, our plan for really monitoring both discipline and academic data throughout the year. When we return next time, I'll talk a little bit about a new course at Renfro, our social justice course that has started. So you'll see that that's there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next time after they've really gotten up and running. And then we will move from there. So I'll close with another quote, and this one is from Atul Gawande, surgeon and author. Better is possible. It does not take genius. It takes ingenuity. It takes diligence. It takes moral clarity. And above all, it takes a willingness to try. Are there any questions?
I had a question, and it's back toward the beginning of your presentation, but you mentioned that a part of your equity action plan is going to be linked to the school improvement plans. So that makes me think you're working together with the SLTs on their school improvement plans. Can you talk about what kinds of things you would like to see in each school's school improvement plan?
Okay. I'm sure we will have more presentations about this as we go forward, but I'll touch a little bit on, we had our first opportunity to really have some time to work on this at the superintendent staff retreat after we presented the Equity Action Plan. There are a number of different places throughout the plan that parts of the Equity Action Plan can live in that document. As you know, we're tying it to the ends policies. And so equity has a section there, and there are just many opportunities that schools are looking at their data for MAP scores. They're looking at the achievement gap and making sure that we have specific action steps related to that. Looking at professional learning for teachers. In the action plan, if you remember, we outlined some specific trainings that would happen, but schools will also look at their data to see if there are additional equity-focused trainings that can tie in, and then ways to monitor that as well. And these plans, after they are completed and all of the drafts are accepted, and moving forward to the SLT for their input and feedback as well. So they will definitely be able to connect around this as well.
Okay, I think that's great. I feel like you've started off the year, with a really, great foot forward with, a focus on this at opening day, and also a lot of the training for the new teachers. And I think working with the school improvement plan is a great way to keep it present and consistently in front of the SLTs and the principal throughout the year, and kind of also could help in monitoring to make sure that things are being implemented throughout the year, as opposed to just, beginning of the year and end of the year, to make sure that we're actually watching how those things are being implemented. So I think that sounds like a really good way to work to bring what you're doing down into the school, each school. Yeah.
Another question, but more so for you, Dr. Duty, I think. I love what you did with suspensions and things last year with the high school. And I know we focused on the high school because the number was larger. But I'm just curious if there's some trickle down happening, even specifically in elementary. They're not that high, but we are seeing that there is some disproportionality there. And just wanted to know if there was anything that you were doing a little more touching on those schools as well.
Yeah, so we're continuing with the practice of before any student's suspended, there's a certain people at central office to contact to talk through whether or not that's the appropriate consequence and whatnot. And that weekly discipline analysis is district-wide. So whatever discipline has gone in, it's looking at all of it, not just at the high school or middle school. You're right, it's very rare at other levels, but all of the principals are involved in those discussions about discipline and what it looks like. And we're also making, and you'll hear more about this when we get to that work session, but we're making some really positive progress with restorative justice and where we're going with those practices. Okay. And so we're really excited to report on a lot of that. So that's going to be able to decrease suspensions considerably and make sure the consequences are more related to what's actually happening in the offense.
I just have one more question. How would you describe success? What would it look like with the mindfulness ambassador program and the Check and Connect?
So with those programs, we are looking to see a decrease in referrals. We're looking to see better attendance for the students who are involved in those programs. And looking at that as leading to course completion for students. So those are some of our indicators that we'd like to see.
Okay.
Yes. This is very helpful, so thank you for presenting this. I have some concern that, I guess I would like to see us doing more to help more students directly in a quicker fashion. And I know it's a tall order. I feel like right now we're focusing most of our efforts on training staff and giving them accessibility to professional development opportunities and speakers and all of that. My concern is, and I know you're always going to hear from us. It's not enough and it's not fast enough. But I think that's part of our job and our role is to kind of push and challenge for more and faster. But I feel like most of kind of what's been presented is about training staff, which is a huge part of this. But I also feel like that's going to take the most amount of time. I mean, it's really about changing people's mindsets, right? And it's not something that, a few training sessions is going to address. It's necessary. I'm glad we're doing it. It's a process. Like, I don't want to take that off of our litany of things that we're doing to address this. But my concern is just that we've got so many kids who have already received, inequitable disciplinary actions, which has had impacts on where they are now in their classroom and social settings. Same thing, academically. And so I guess I want to see more outreach. I want to see us doing more outreach for those students now. And I love the mindfulness work that we're doing in the Check and Connect, but I was so disappointed to hear that that's only reaching 20 students and 30 at most. To me, it just seems like a drop in the bucket compared to a real kind of here and now challenge that we're facing with our kids. And I understand the budgetary restraints. I understand that it's kind of a pilot program that we're sort of evaluating and learning from. But I gotta think that there's more that we can do to reach out to these kids now. And if we would like to do more, if we would like for this pilot program to address more kids, which I would love for it to, that's where I'd like it to come back to the board about, well, here's what it would cost for us to do that. I understand, taking 15% out of the special education budget, and that's a limited amount of funds for a defined set of services that we have to provide. But I just feel like that's maybe a board level discussion about if we need more funds for it, how can we do that, if that's what we need to do. But I guess to me, it seems like there's a real gap in our approach to addressing this, and the gap is not touching on enough students now.
Do you want me?
I was just gonna say, I think that's really good food for thought, and it's good to know that there's maybe board support for doing more. And so that's a great thing that we can take back and discuss and talk through of, are there things where we feel like if there was more funding there, we could do some things that move faster. I do think the staff training piece is huge, and we talk a lot about, a lot of this is about the adults, not the kids, right? We don't want to make it into a kid problem, that this is
Right.
on the backs of the kids. But yeah, we definitely can talk through that and figure out if there are some things where expanding programs like that, or some additional ones that provide support directly to the kids that might have a little quicker impact, we definitely can talk through that.
That would be great. I mean, I always worry, and not worry, I mean, teacher training is so important, and it's a significant part of this. You have some concern always as a board that you're going to invest all these resources in training teachers, and then they could leave, and you want to kind of keep all that know-how and investment here in our district. So I love that we're also doing this as a part of our new teacher orientation program to kind of catch all of the new ones. And so I love that. Like, I love what we're doing with the teacher training part, and I agree that that's the most significant part. My concern is just that I think we also have some repair work to do on the kids that are here now. And so I'd like to see more focus on how we're going to address that.
You know, kind of on that note, I like the thought of reaching as many children as possible. And I think every child needs to be reached, and not just those that are significant offenders or have a lot of marks on their, on their discipline record. And that's where I think it does matter very much that we have a presence at the schools regularly, whether it be monthly or quarterly or whatever it is. So back to kind of my comments about it's a great start to the year, and we've done a great job of making this a priority and emphasizing it at opening day, and with new teacher training, we must do that. But I think we need to continue with the touch points, whether it be monthly or quarterly or whatever your team might suggest, because there is going to be limits to the funding. There are going to be limits to the people we can hire to run a program like this. We don't yet have stats on how successful this particular program is, but I think that we could probably reach the most students the fastest if we do have a very formal, focused effort on making sure that we're reaching our staff regularly, because these teachers are the ones that are having the day-to-day interactions with every student in the classroom, and these are where these little problems start. And I feel like that is something we can do, and I think we're on our way to do that, and I want to keep that as a priority, because I feel like that's where we can be most effective with the resources that we now have immediately, by training the trainer, so to speak, and making sure that the building leadership in every school is emphasizing this at monthly staff meetings, and that it's mindfulness from the point of view of the teacher, not just the student, but from the point of view of every staff and administrator and teacher who's interacting with every student.
I think that's an excellent point. If I can just tag team a little bit on that too. The method that we're using for identifying the kids for the mindfulness work and for the check and connect work, you're finding kind of the students that are most in need with the most referrals, the ones that are kind of rising to the top of your list based on the rubric, which is great. And I'd love for us to kind of expand that list, but I also want us to think about those kids that are in the middle who don't have a long list of referrals, but yet they still have needs and struggles that we can address. And so as we sort of think, Dr. Duty and your team sort of evaluates what we can do to try to reach some of the kids now, I want to make sure that we're not just focusing on kind of the highest needs or the ones that rise to the top of the rubric, but also those that are really kind of caught in the middle.
Oops, sorry, Garrett.
I'm going to try not to repeat what's been said. I do have a slightly different angle, I think, on what's been said. And some of the things you mentioned, I want to start with that. Most of what we've heard has been a focus on deficit-based identification and removing deficits. I hope, and I think this is what you're saying, I'm just saying it differently, I hope we can also, perhaps through student support services that we're working on at the high school and other places, do asset-based social and emotional learning. I understand that we need to prioritize our limited resources on those who need it most and who need the effect the most. I'm very sympathetic to how can we look at ways that we could take what we're doing in student support services while we're growing that in ways that would reach a wider group. I think I noted, I just want to make sure I got it, Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond, is that correct? Okay. One of the comments earlier, I wanted to reiterate, how will we evaluate effectiveness? How will we know when we get there? I think you did a great, and I think Tasha was talking about that. The look at discipline, it was almost summer before last, I believe, and the report that really just kind of shone a spotlight on it. And you said, this is how we'll know. When we don't see this, this is how we'll know when we've arrived. When we look at taking those scarce resources and it comes time to have that budget conversation, it'll be helpful, I think, for us to have some idea of knowing how effective we anticipate these various options to be when we're trying to pinch the last penny and make it go the, mixed metaphor, longest mile. I guess, I think, let me go back to where I started. Are there asset-based approaches to what we're doing that will help build students up as opposed to remove what we identify as deficits?
So I don't know if you remember the draft we presented with the Equity Action Plan. We'll have a full presentation on that for September, but every student is a part of RTI. RTI is in the Equity Action Plan. So we're looking at prevention. We're looking at making sure that we're providing support to all students through that aspect. And we talked a lot about professional learning and how that captures really every student, because every teacher and staff member would be participating. One part of our approach in terms of looking at cultural humility is really looking at the assets and looking at diversity as an asset, and sort of taking a different mindset about students and empowering them. So we're also collaborating with student support and really looking at some social emotional learning options. And I have been meeting with people from Emory who are doing compassion-based lessons for students, and really looking at different ways that we can reach out to all students and really help to empower them and to really focus on social emotional learning, and also working with curriculum and instruction on that as well, looking at what our opportunities can be in that area. And we're getting pretty creative too, because we're looking at grant funding and looking at all the ways that we can get in additional resources to be able to support students. You touched earlier, I think both of you touched on sort of sustainability and how can we make sure it's not just these teachers. Annie, you talked about these teachers and then that they go somewhere else, and that's a concern for us as well. And so part of the plan is really moving into that train the trainer component. And so as we look at it next month, you'll be able to see that over the years, we're trying to build that capacity so that we'll have people who are able to, not just on the discipline committee or central office discipline analysis team, but at the school level, who have gone through Courageous Conversations affiliate practitioner training, so that they are able to, at every single meeting, to be that voice and to really keep the focus where it needs to be on prevention and on really valuing what students have to bring and looking at student engagement at every level of what is going on at the school. So there are components there that we'll be able to flesh out a little bit more as we dig into the plan.
Last comment, I think, is more for Dr. Duty, and it's, I recall at one time, maybe it was a conference or a previous board meeting, where it came up that, I think it was a conference, that the correlation between some of the deficits, like tardies and referrals, go all the way back to middle school, and that you could actually predict who would not graduate based upon tardies, referrals, and there was one other thing. There were 3 legs to the chair in middle school. I'll try to track down that, and when we look at reporting, I think it would be great if we could try to find some of those predictors, at least that are backed by the research and the data. Thank you. And I think on the asset-based stuff, I think RTI, I think, is more of a identifying a deficit and intervening to address it. I think what I was referring about more was, what are those factors that students who are successful, what assets do they have? And if you can identify those types of assets, like at work, it's somebody at the workplace who you would call a friend. It might be somebody who cares about you. But whatever those assets are, I'm trying to find that as well in the research that I've read. In student supports, I think it's helpful to look at what assets can we ensure that where we can, that we can help our students have if those assets are associated with student success. So I think it's very typical in America, in the media, to focus on the negative. And sometimes if we can add those positives, we might be able to get the difference we're looking for as well.
Absolutely. That really makes me think a lot about our EL framework. We had a great presentation about that today, and so those character aspects and IB learner profile and things that students are focusing on definitely would be covering some of those areas.
Thank you.
All right. Good report. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda,
Excuse me, I missed the public comments, I have to keep it 30 seconds. I understand that perhaps it's not, but based on what I've heard in the short period of time I've been here, can you just give me 30 seconds so I can get up and perhaps overlook in this discussion?
give me a,
We talked about,
well, wait a second.
and I think
I'm sorry.
there should
If
also
you asked if you could,
be teachers who are missing
this,
students, we have,
you're gonna have to stop that, please.
so that should be addressed in addition to
I'm not-
focusing on students who, where we
It's
have
just not appropriate. If you want to be heard, you need to give me a chance. You asked a question, you didn't even answer.
Go ahead.
And I think the answer is no. We missed the public comment. Happy to talk after the meeting, okay? All right, consent items. We have 5 items on the consent agenda: the personnel report, the school nutrition report, financial reports, the career and technical education fiscal year 2019 state and federal grants, and an amendment to the Perkins and Will contract. Do we have a motion to approve the consent items? Do you have a question?
Yes, would it be all right if we pulled off the amendment to the Perkins and Will contract? I just have
Sure.
a couple of quick questions on
Sure.
that.
So it's the first 4 items.
We'll move it to the action item.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a motion to approve the first 4 items?
Move to approve the first 4 items on the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the first 4 are approved. And Romanet 5, Perkins and Will, will be discussed in action items. Okay, informational reports. We have a preliminary enrollment report.
You do. Well, Ms. Watley's coming up. I'll just remind you that this is an addition to how we've done things in the past. We, as you know, our official enrollment count date is in October.
Thank you.
But we felt like it would be nice to have a snapshot before that of just where are we? And so she's going to do a report on the preliminary enrollment of where are we at the start of the school year. And she'll let you know about some of the caveats and cautions with interpreting the data.
Good evening, Board. Good evening, Dr. Duty. The following is a summary of our August enrollment captured on August 6th. There are students who have begun the enrollment process and are not included in this count because it wasn't completed at that moment. Similarly, students who have not shown up on the 10th day of school or withdrawn for lack of attendance. Additionally, enrollment is ongoing throughout the year. For all these reasons, these numbers are expected to change and should be interpreted with caution. Enrollment is typically captured during the October and March counts, and the numbers are considered more stable at this time. And that has been the basis of our projection work and how we get funding for students from those days. And if you, I can click it. So it's, again, just cautious, it keeps changing. If you look at this graph, and you can see I added in today's numbers just to show you since last week when I made this report, we've added another 33 students. But you can see our enrollment continues to go up. We'll need to see where we are in October. Each year we've added between 200 and 400 students, and we seem to be staying consistent with that. It's okay. I think I gave somebody my notes, but that's all right. So this just shows you the total enrollment by school for the K-3 schools, and you can notice that we continue to have very different sized schools here. And when you look at it by grade level, again, there's a lot of differences from grade to grade. And you can see that those cohorts in the younger grades continue to be large cohorts. As you look at our 4 through 12 schools, those numbers continue to increase, more so than the K-3 numbers. When you go back and look at, so the numbers at Glenwood are the same. Claremont has gone down just a little bit. Oakhurst has gone up just a little bit. Westchester has gone down a little bit. Winona Park has gone up. So numbers are maintaining but not growing as much as when you see at Fave, Renfro, and high school, we're really adding quite a bit of students. When you look at what that looks like at each grade level, you can see that second grade is big. But all of those younger grades are well above 400 students. And our smaller classes are starting to age out, and those bigger classes are moving up. When you look at this, one of the things that's interesting is that kindergarten is maintaining those larger sizes, and that's pretty consistent. So it's not that less kids are coming in from that end. And if you look at this blue line, you can see that was just how many students we've added from August to August. And as you can see, I adjusted it with a little red line for today. So earlier it looked like it was going down, but it's really changing every day. And I expect that after Labor Day, we'll start to, we usually get a big push at Labor Day, and then it stays pretty consistent. If we add students throughout the year, it tends to be around the New Year time then. So hopefully by Labor Day and by October, that'll be what we have for the year. And so that's where we're at. The preliminary observations is our enrollment continues to grow. Kindergarten numbers are holding steady, and we expect to continue to increase. Our next steps would be after the October count day to have a report of enrollment and withdrawal, and we will summarize some of those questions that Tasha was asking at the last enrollment report about where are kids going and where are they coming from, and we'll look at some of the historical data trends and look at enrollment by race.
I just have a quick
Sure.
question. Your first slide, or it's the first page actually, it's K through 12 enrollment. I don't understand today.
So, on August 6th, we had 5,547. Today, we have 5,580. So it's just showing you it's a little bit higher. We keep, so,
But 5,580 is on the line less than 500. It looks like,
There's a red dot there. You
there's
might
a
not
red
see.
dot. I guess it didn't show up quite so well. I apologize about that. I was just trying to show you that, like,
I was confused by that.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Thank you.
It's going up a little bit, and it will probably continue to go up a little bit.
Questions? Garrett?
I just want to thank you for this. This is great. I'm looking at the last 5 years and noting that this year, the August to August growth was 255 students, if I can type into a calculator correctly. And that's the lowest growth in those 5 years. So that gives me some reason to hope. I know that we're higher today than we were by another 30 or so students. I imagine it was similar in 2017 from August 1st to today. I am interested, when we hit that October meeting, I look very closely at kindergarten first and second. And I'm particularly interested in how kindergarten first and second compare to multiple years. Because we typically get a bump from kindergarten to first. I'm curious if the bump size from this year's first grade to second grade, how that looked, if we take that back a couple years. I'm hopeful that what we're seeing is the beginning. I don't know my statistics like you do. A linear regression, something that could maybe say what deal of accuracy this line is pointing up or down. But I'm hopeful that we're seeing a decline in the rate of growth in our enrollments.
If you look by grade, you can kind of see that, but we can get 5 years of that.
But yeah, we agree about the trends. We knew you would like to see trends. That's why that kindergarten graph's there. That's the
Appreciate it.
Garrett graph.
For Gary.
That's yours.
But you will definitely see a lot more detail like that. The other thing we'll be doing, and just to clarify, the October count date is scheduled such that you'll actually get the report in November. It'll be at the November board meeting. And we're trying to have updated enrollment projections by then. And since it's been several years since we've had an outside entity do that, and their projections have been very accurate, actually. We were gonna include them here because we were so impressed that they're still accurate this far out. But they'll be in the other report. We're gonna contract with them again. You may recall they're the same people who did our boundary realignment process that we were so pleased with. We're gonna contract with them to do updated enrollment projections, and Heidi's enrollment committee will work with them on getting the data to them to make them as accurate as possible. So we'll have a lot more to talk about at the November board meeting.
And the last question was for Ms. White to remind us. I remember being very interested in the question you raised about the drop in where do the students go who don't graduate? Is that what it was?
It was actually, the question was, are our black students leaving, where are they going? Are they going
Right.
within Georgia, are they leaving? And so we can pull that apart and let you know.
Awesome. So that will definitely go with, because we already know that unfortunately enrollment with African Americans is steadily declining.
Correct.
But yeah, I definitely would like to match that against the African Americans who are here. Are they staying? What grades are they what grades are they leaving? And I don't know if we'll be able to really know why. I mean, that would be great, but I don't know if we'll be able to have.
We have what they mark when they withdraw, like, are
okay.
they leaving for another school in Georgia, for private school, for homeschool?
Okay.
Are they going out of state?
Okay,
So,
perfect.
kinda.
Kinda, all right.
You can draw
thank you.
some inferences once you
Right.
see the data. Some of it you just won't know, but some of it's obvious. If you're moving out of state, it's not just because you didn't like the school district, probably.
Right.
That would be unusual.
My last comment is that the difference between the August numbers and the October numbers, and this is just to remind us all, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that typically in many school districts, those numbers go down, right? Because you're carrying students on the enrollments
Sometimes they do, that's
who
correct.
you haven't yet said no longer attend the school system. And your comment was that we anticipate these numbers to continue to go
The
up.
trend we tend to see is that, like, if you come here on a registration day, you'll see the lobby full. The registrations continue to come in well up to Labor Day, sometimes after. I think especially when you have people who move from other areas. I'll give you one example. Chicago always starts after Labor Day. So if that's where you've lived and you're moving here, you don't necessarily know that we started August 1st. And so it's not that unusual for people to come right up just before Labor Day, just because of their experience where they're coming from. They didn't know that they needed to be registering earlier than that necessarily, or just because of the way their schedules worked out. So I would guess we will continue to see an increase like you saw there between even just August 6th and today's number. We still are seeing people in the office registering their students. Now, when we get to the point that we start rolling kids off, just like other districts do, there are families that move and never tell you. And you never get a request for records, and you never have any indication until that kid doesn't show up the first 10 days, and you can't contact anyone, and eventually you roll them off. And so there will be some loss of students that we think are going to be returning because no one's ever told us otherwise. So there will be some of that, so.
And today, a lot of the 10-day withdrawals would have been out if everybody is on their game. And so there was some of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take up first the Perkins and Will comment, or contract, that's been moved to the action agenda.
Noel's going to come up. He can explain that. Is the question about what it is about, or what?
Yeah, so I just wanted to pull it because, one, it's dipping into our contingency line item, and so I want to know kind of how much is left in the contingency line item. It looks like this is for, and the other reason I wanted to pull it also is just because it looks like this is for LEED certification. We had a lot of discussions at, the outset of this project about whether or not we wanted to go for LEED certification and how much we were willing to spend on it, as compared to sort of other options. And now that it looks like it's $100,000 more than what we were budgeting, I just sort of feel like we as a board might just want to kind of confer on that a little bit and also understand why? Like, why? I understand what it's for, that it's for the LEED certification, but what about the LEED certification was unanticipated, which is costing $100,000 more?
So none of this was, when I presented the original, none of this part was unanticipated. This was part of our discussions that we had down the road in terms of what it would cost extra to go down the road of the LEED. I don't have it right in front of me, but I
Okay.
can pull up some of.
So this is, so, I mean,
So the number's in line, to your point, this
Yes.
number is in line with what we discussed at that work session.
it's
when we
not
talked about
$100,000 more
Not
than what we
additional,
initially
right.
approved.
That's
Okay.
and that's a great question. So
Okay.
this is catching everything up to our commitment to going down the road of LEED. Now that we have our construction contract, this is helping to determine what we would have to do to catch up on
Okay.
the
I
design
don't,
contract.
So it's implementing what we talked about at that work session.
I don't have any other questions then.
No, it
I
was a
thought
good
this was
question.
more-
Thank
No,
you.
I'm glad that you asked.
I do have
That's
one
important
question.
clarification.
Following on Annie's, I'm looking at this and this is like less than 0.5%, which to me, are there other costs towards the leads that are?
Yes. So the
so
other
this is-
costs leading up to that 2 to 3% number that we discussed to begin with is part of the increase in the construction contract. This is the design contract that we're working on here. So that combined made up those 2 to 3% that we talked about in those discussions.
And if I remember correctly, I think
This
part of
still
it's
is
a-
very good.
Part of it's a question of timing. You always engage your architects first. And we had
Right,
engaged our
right.
architects at the time we're having the discussion, whereas with the construction, some of it was able to get incorporated into the guaranteed maximum price
Yeah,
that we
all
were
of it was.
negotiating. So that's why you only see this number here, not the rest of the number, because they could put that in with their additional costs.
And to answer your question, Annie, we still have a very good, strong contingency left on the project.
What is it, you know?
Off the top of my head,
That's okay.
it's, yeah,
Okay.
I don't
We'll
want to
find it, we'll
misquote
send it
something.
out to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
You can get the
I
number.
apologize, I just don't know,
No, that's great.
but it's good and healthy still.
Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the amendment to the Perkins and Will contract as stated on the agenda.
Second?
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is the, well, we've all been waiting for the revisions to the calendar, the proposed calendar.
Yes. You want to do your little introduction and then
Sure,
we can jump into that?
sure. Good evening, everyone. So, academic year calendars, we present two when we bring the calendars. The 1921, this is the fourth time you've seen it in all of its iterations, all the drafts, and then some questions that you had last time that we'll answer tonight. And this is the first time you've seen the 2021 draft. Let's just remind you how we got here. Calendars have been developed by calendar committees and affirmed by them over the years. Remember, we've been doing balanced calendar since about 2010. For those of you who remember what that discussion was like, was deep and hard for a long time. We basically kept the same calendar structure since then of having an early start, a winter and a fall and a winter break in addition to the other breaks. I think I haven't heard since then, I was on that calendar committee way back then, that we've had any complaints about the breaks, having the extended breaks, are those issues. The clarity for the 1920 calendar, we moved fall break a week later than usual at the request of the calendar committee because the time between Labor Day and Thanksgiving was a longer time, so they wanted an extra week in there. Then have more time between that and Thanksgiving. The professional learning and work days are generally school-based. The only district mandated day is the January day, but sometimes we give them suggestions of what they're supposed to do on those days, but they're school-based days, which may mean one of two things. It's a work day for teachers, or it's something you have planned in your building that you need to do with your staff. So those are options they get to make, but, you know, smart options to use their time well. And then the spring break again follows the Metro agreement about spring break, which is apparently Masters Week, I don't know, I'm not a Masters fan. And all the metro districts except one seem to follow that. And that district does what it wants. So those are the 1920 calendars and the clarifications.
Questions?
Oh, I have more stuff. What do you want to say? So we took the makeup days. What extended our calendar a little bit was, remember last year we had a conversation, and I think the year before, about the makeup days that were in the fall and winter break, and that was difficult. So we took those out. So those are without harm, they're held harmless. So those breaks are planned as they are, with no makeup days in there. The makeup days are still those teacher work days, except for Election Day for 2020, because we use 2 of our schools for polling places, and because it's Election Day, and the January day, the return day. I think it's the 5th one year and the 6th one year, because that's a teacher work day. So those are the reasons those days look different. Looking over calendars, there have been, since 2009, 4 years where we went past Memorial Day. So we went,
Sorry, can you say that again?
yeah, since 2009, 4 different years we've gone past Memorial Day. School has ended past Memorial Day in 2009, 14, 15, and 18. Sometimes it's because Memorial Day is the 31st, and sometimes it's the 25th or whatever. So to get our 182 days in, that's how it works. Our August 1st start date mirrors most metro districts. 2 metro school districts start July 27th this year, and 3 started July 30th. If you remember last year, one of the metro districts started July 30th, and that was on the news, I think, every night for a month. So,
And I think 2 of them started August 6th, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. So
How many are going past Memorial Day?
I didn't see a lot of them this year. I didn't look at all of them because I didn't have a chance to look at them. I was just looking at the start dates, so I didn't look at the end dates for them. But they've built, most of them have not held harmless those dates that we have for fall and winter break. So that's the difference. Because in the past, and that was part of our conversation, remember not long ago, about if we're going to give those days up or not. And the conversations we've had, and I know as a building principal, about who's already planned stuff for those weeks and the difficulty around that.
And I'll also say, it is a little bit unusual that we have 5 different whole weeks, or 6 different whole weeks of time out of school during, and that's part of that balanced calendar of, it's not a year-round calendar, but it's not a traditional academic calendar either. We could greatly shorten up and tighten up the start to end. We'd get rid of some of those intersessions and things if we did that. So, and one of the things that we've been committed to when we made that decision to not touch makeup days during the September and the February weeks is we are working on plans of using those weeks for what they were designed for, which is opportunities for some enrichment for students who may still be around and may still have an opportunity to participate in something academic to help advance them further. So we are trying to plan out some activities there as well. So I'll just share that.
Yeah, well, that was our plan, remember, and then the economy crashed. So we weren't able to do the intercession time as they were planned initially.
So I'll also share, we wanted to make it really clear where those potential makeup days are, because that was one of the concerns we've had in the past of, we marked it, but we weren't really serious about it. Well, these we're serious about, right? These really might get used as makeup days. And also to clarify, sometimes the day in November is marked as a potential makeup day and sometimes not. And that's because of where it is in that election cycle. So like in the 1920 calendar, it's marked as a potential makeup day because that's a pretty small election, and if we had to have kids there while the polling place is going, it's not that big a deal. We might even be able to move the polling place for a nice small election. Whereas for the 2020, 2021, it is not marked as a potential makeup day because that's a major election, and it's, in addition to everybody wanting to be able to vote and get out, it's going to be much busier. And so that's, in case you're wondering why sometimes it's marked and sometimes it's not, it's a judgment of kind of where that is. We are working to get polling places out of our schools, and that is an active project for us. You may recall we were able to get it moved out of Winona Park a year or two ago. And so we're working to continue that process because we would like to not have to plan our calendar around Election Day unless we truly wanted it because it's Election Day to do something differently with our students. So there is value at having polling places at schools when it's smaller and kids can kind of be an active participant. That's not how it's worked here. It's been a very huge security concern. You have a lot of strangers coming. It causes a lot of chaos around the school day. So we are working to get those moved somewhere else so that if we want to have school on that day in the future, we will be able to.
Also, with the balanced calendar, just to add to that, remember, we went to a whole week of Thanksgiving instead of just Thursday and Friday. So that's a real plus for us. And then we've tried to commit to 2 weeks at winter holiday break, because in the past, depending on when the 25th was, where we moved it, and we may go 3 days one week and 5 the next. So we tried to, again, clear that up so those breaks are more significant.
And I will clarify too, just a reminder of our process. So the reason one of these calendars is marked tentative or first draft is because this is the first time it comes forward, like the 1921 came forward in December, and then again in March, and then again July 17th. This is the first time it comes, and then over the course of the next year, we'll gather whatever input, make whatever tweaks we want to make, and we won't vote on a final version of the 2020-2021 until this meeting next year. I also have attached there, since we're doing the academic calendars, I went ahead and made what I call governance calendars, mainly for board meetings. I also threw the SCLT meetings on there, because as you know, we've had some challenges getting those scheduled, so I wanted to get all that figured out ahead of time. So I encourage board members to look at those. I followed the practice that I shared in the item that it's basically the second Tuesday of the month, but there are some moved like we've had in the past. And I tried to schedule as many work sessions in there as well that we could fit in. I put a retreat day in September and February. That's where we typically end up having retreats. But we can change any of that you'd like to change, but I wanted to be proactive and get some of that stuff out there, including the tax hearings, which in any given year we may not have to have, but I went ahead and calendared them so that we had them there. And then the work calendars are really just there for your information in case you're curious what our employee workday calendars look like. We have several different employee groups based on how many days they work per year. And so that's really just there for informational purposes, so you can see how all of that connects together. So,
I appreciated all that.
good.
Questions about the calendar?
Just a comment, there are a lot of things to consider, and thank you for doing that. And I can tell just by the rainbow of colors highlighting specific things on here, how many things you have to think about, the least of which is not considering that often the staff work a day earlier and a day later than many of our breaks. And so we had to take that into consideration also to make their breaks make sense as much as possible, while prioritizing having an academic calendar that makes learning a priority. And I think, it was a very difficult year. We'll all acknowledge that. Some unusual things happen, but in our community with water mains and trees that create water mains that break and trees that cut power on a moment's notice when the wind blows in a storm and we could get snow. I mean, I do feel like this has been a really good effort to plan. I think we need to have predictability. I think we tried to have the dates that would be optional makeup days in the middle of the year, and it was controversial and difficult and proved to be hard to manage. So I, for one, really appreciate your effort and the effort of the calendar committee to come up with something that can be predictable and that prioritizes academic learning.
Thanks.
I should share too, I forgot to mention, one of the requests was that we come up with some written procedures of how we decide whether or not to use like an October day or March day. We do have all of that created, along with a full administrative regulation of just how do you develop a calendar? What are the parameters we use in developing academic calendars, board calendars, workday calendars? All of that is written up and documented. And as soon as we decide if we want to tweak any of those parameters tonight, we'll get that out and published, and anybody who wants to see it can do it. But just as a general rule of thumb, like for the October and March date this year, if we can't give at least 2 weeks notice to people that we're gonna have to use that as a makeup day, then it doesn't get used as a makeup day. We've got to give people advance notice of that. So in general, that's our process of making sure we give people some notice ahead of time.
That makes sense. I would just echo those thoughts. This is a really tough situation, and I think the board, feels strongly that we ought to have at least 180 school days in the year. That's what's required by law, unless the governor declares a state of emergency and we don't have to make it up, or unless you try to kind of wiggle through an exemption for charter systems, all of which is just really not where we want to go. We want to keep 180 days intact, and if you want to do that, you have to build in some makeup days, and if you don't build in makeup days, you're left with picking between the lesser of many evils, which is either taking away professional learning, which is something we prioritize and don't want to do, taking away one of the traditional holiday or traditional week-long breaks that we've had, where other families also plan their vacations to do enrichment and things for kids. But more importantly, aside from vacations, which can be scheduled at various times, I think the kids just need a break. I think the break is good for the kids every 6 weeks or so, and it's good for the students. Good for the teachers.
Good for grown folks.
Good for the teachers as well. I feel like it kind of rejuvenates everybody and re-energizes everyone. Or the alternative, so if you don't do professional learning and you don't take away one of these week-long breaks, then you start in July, which is not something that anyone wants to do. And so you got to put the days somewhere, and there's no real good way. There's not really a great way to do it, but I guess if I have to pick between either starting in July or taking away one of the weeks that we've traditionally had off during the school year that people rely on, or doing less than 180 days, I think I have to lean in favor of going past Memorial Day and hope that people can plan their vacations to start on June 1st instead of May 25th. So that's where I kind of come down on it.
Can you remind me the makeup of the calendar committee?
So the calendar committees in this year's hasn't met yet, because we just started.
All right.
Are SLT members or an administrator from every grade level. So instead of we used to have a calendar committee of 30 people or something. That's unwieldy. So everybody's represented.
Grade level, you mean grade band?
Grade band,
right?
I'm sorry. Yeah. So
like
all
a
the
K3,
schools
a 4 or 5.
have those choices,
Administrative. Okay.
administrative, and
So,
that's,
so one SLT member and then an administrator, is that what you said?
Okay, awesome. And I tend to.
or an SLT representative, you can choose somebody else.
I see.
Do you ever have parents on the committee?
Yeah, those are parents.
The SLT.
SLT
gotcha.
is the parent.
Parents. Yeah, and I tend to lean with Annie. I mean, I would have maybe leaned toward coming to school a couple of days earlier. And when we put that out as a potential, we got an array of emails
Right.
about that.
Right.
No.
Right.
Much more than the Memorial Day. And I will say that I've received a few phone calls and emails in support of the calendar, and I have received some in support, and not in support of the calendar, which pretty much happens every year. But just to thank the parents that came in with your concerns, thank you for sharing that with us. We definitely received much more backlash starting earlier, and so this is where the compromise has fallen, and we're not seeing as much backlash or opposition to it than we have with some of the other options that we've thrown out there. Yeah, I think I too am in support of this calendar. I can tell that the committee, they kept going back because Bruce has been up here
Yeah.
many times with this calendar. This is not the first time, so.
It's my nemesis. The calendar is my
Right.
nemesis.
So I do appreciate all of the time that you and the committee have put into it, and you've heard concerns that we as a board have had, you've heard the concerns that parents have had, and I think you've done a good job to try to maximize what you've heard thus far, so I appreciate your help on it.
I'll add too that I think it's really positive that we're this far ahead, because nobody's gonna be happy with whatever the calendar is, but, like, our new process allows us, now, the tentative calendar is not this year's, it's not next year's, it's the year after that.
Right.
And if that doesn't give folks enough time to plan for whatever they need to, I don't know what else we can do better. So I am pleased that we're on a schedule now where we're not doing things at the last minute, so that if it is something that causes a problem, at least you have time to plan for it. So I'm pleased that we've gotten to that point.
I have one more comment, and it is that it's something that I've thought about a lot and while we're doing our equity work. And I know that one of the things that seems to come up the most when we talk about when we're not in school, meaning the week-long breaks here and there, or the summer, is we hear from people who are talking about planning trips and vacations, but I don't want to forget those who cannot afford to do that and who don't have the luxury of doing that. And I think that our calendar, as you were saying, especially if we make it such that it is predictable and we plan far ahead, it will give us that opportunity to help the students who may not otherwise have the opportunity to do enriching activities during our breaks, more options to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing that we can go back to that. Again, that was, those of us who were here, that was a big part of the conversation when we went to the balanced calendar, and then the economy crashed, so. that away.
So you know, I don't like going past Memorial Day, but you look at, I don't know how you make the puzzle work either. And my comment is more to do with process, which, I mean, I feel like we've been talking about this calendar, and we've
That's the fourth time.
we've been talking about it a lot. We've been trying to get people to put in their comments. And the one question I have is that, you know, from a board perspective, I mean, this is a classic example of the thing where you're not going to make everybody happy. The best we can do is have a committee figure out how to balance it, and et cetera, et cetera. It would be awfully nice if we could make sure that the comments that come at the end, you know, they come because we put it on our board agenda, and so people know, and it's like, well, this is our opportunity to weigh in. The truth is, the opportunity to weigh in is at your committee.
Right.
And I'm wondering what we can do to improve the process so that you get the same push, so that the message goes out in the Winona email and the RMS email and says, now is your opportunity to actually affect the decision, because now, you know, because the board's probably not going to affect it.
Right.
No, I agree completely, and I appreciate that there are folks who put the message out and get it out there. But I think because we're so intimately involved in the process, and we know, like, setting the tentative calendar is just the start of the process, and it can change before the next one, and that's not clear.
Right.
And so if you're just coming in and just seeing it for the first time, you don't know where we are in the process. And so I do think that's something that we will work on, is some better communication plans. And I think also we'll make sure with the tentative calendar that we can send that out and do a survey and get the feedback, so that we know before we ever finalize it, we get some feedback on what that is, and we can make sure to do that and communicate that all better next time. I definitely think that piece was missing this time when we moved everything so much earlier. I don't think we were as active in our communication out as we could have been.
And one of the things is that we need to make, you know, this goes with many of the different things that we talk about, that we need to make the delegation clear, that the time and the place to air concerns is going to be with you guys, to limit people's expectation that the board's really going to affect, you know, unless something's just way off. But to make sure that your process is the real process, people know how to get notice of it and interact, provide their comments, and that you're actually entertaining those comments and providing responses instead of us.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and how the SLT members communicate that back out. So my charge to them kind of is, now make sure you have, you know, feedback on this, but perhaps in the future giving them, put this in the newsletter, do this and do that, some real specific things, although they've had the charge to put it out there.
Right.
And that's
with
one of
their
the things
constituent
that
groups.
documenting that administrative regulation is about, is making
Right.
sure when we make those decisions, we document it so we remember what we decided and how we're
Right.
gonna do it. When you see it documents everything. How do you set September break and February break? When do you start? When do you end? How many days do you do? All of those things are in there, and it's very easy to add in a communication protocol and where the input processes happen in there. We can easily add that in
I'd like
there.
to see that. Garrett?
I wanted to ask the question, and if you don't know the exact year, but when did we adopt the balanced calendar?
I think it was 10,
And
2010, about.
the 10th? Okay. And I guess the next question, this is,
I wrote it down and now I don't know where I did with my note, so.
I'm curious if we have, I know that we have the NWA map data, which gives us the spring to fall scores. I wonder if we have that before and after we adopted the balanced calendar.
We can look.
Maybe, if it's a pain, then don't worry, but it'd be very interesting to know if we actually have the numbers on what our summer learning loss was under both calendars.
We can take a look.
And I also know that, there was a meta-analysis by the guy who does all the meta-analyses, Cooper, that quantified summer learning loss and that it disproportionately affects our at-risk populations. So students with disabilities and economically disadvantaged students. I don't know if we'd get down to that granularity. I hear you. I'm like one of the first people that complains and says, it seems like summer's already over. When did it begin, But on the, we've had families come in here and say, my student with ADHD loses so much over the summer. It'd be nice to put some numbers to the questions or the assertions that people make and to check them.
And that was the theory behind the balanced calendar in the first place, was to make the summertime shorter, although it's not really shorter, because you're gonna go longer during the year, and then to have those times, those intersessions to do that makeup work. So that was the original thought behind that, whenever we did that.
Let's definitely plug that into the future something work plan is those, the intercession breaks, because that was one of those things where economic crunch
Right.
fell by the wayside. If that's something
We
that
can
needs
talk
more
about
budget.
that when we get to the work session on curriculum and instruction. We can
Mhm.
add that as one of the topics that
Great.
we talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Should we call the question? Do we have a motion?
And I would say you might not want to read the whole recommendation because I wanted to be really clear on what we were voting on, and so I listed all the dates out. So whatever the recommendation is, it might want to just be recommended as listed in the agenda.
I really like the color coding too, just gotta say that. It really makes everything visible.
Move to approve the 2019-20 and 2020-21 calendars as set forth in tonight's agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, that's all our action items. We have discussion items. Really just a discussion of the board retreat.
So a couple things. One, I'd like to recommend that we do our board retreat on Saturday, September 8th, based on the doodle poll, as well as the availability of people we're hoping to come do a training. That worked, but I wanted to check and make sure that still works, because it's been a little while since we did that doodle poll. And then also, I've talked with various people about some potential topics of what we want to talk about at the retreat, and I thought we should probably get that settled. And some of the things that we've talked about is the overall policy governance, which would include things like the reporting cycle, the superintendent limitations, those pieces of the policy governance pie that we haven't yet talked about for finalization. We talked about the board self-evaluation, which GSBA can assist us with. That's something you do some of the work in advance, and then GSBA comes and does some of the outcome from that. And then we've talked about, we have an outside expert who could come do some training, maybe over lunch or something, on organizational change and kind of what to expect when you're doing massive change like we're doing with some of our efforts, and kind of how that process works. So those were the topics that I've heard from folks, so I throw those out there as potential topics for the retreat. Is there anyone that the 8th does not work for now that a little time has passed?
Works, I just checked.
It appears to work for me.
Okay.
It works for me.
And that's 8 to 5, right?
Yeah, somewhere around there, yeah.
Block out the whole day.
Yeah, block out the whole day.
We should think a little bit if there's some advance work that we can do to make good progress on particular, on the policy stuff in particular. I mean, if we just go round and round, we will make progress, but we might be able to make more progress if we give a little thought to what we should come prepared
Agree
with.
completely, and part of my conversation with the person who could do the training on organizational change is that if there are resources that would be helpful to read ahead of time to kind of prime our learning, so that then we're really focused on processing what we read and things like that.
That would be really
That
great.
would be really helpful, and it'll,
Can you repeat the date or dates?
September 8th.
Okay, so just one day is all we've decided right now.
With
Okay.
with the idea being, right,
That we
to-
do one in
we'll have
February
another
also.
one in the winter, which we don't
Yeah.
have
Okay.
traditionally.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
What's the opening day in January? We don't usually do that, do we?
That's the day, we started that tradition last year, so this year we'll make it a tradition, right? Of kind of doing another kickoff with staff and using it as a rah-rah, hey, we're halfway through the year, let's keep up the good work, where do we need to refocus, kind of where are we with things, and it was great. It was a really helpful thing, it was a great time to get all the staff together and do kind of a mid-year jump, you know, so that's what that one is.
That's great.
So we weren't invited to that one? Is that
No,
what happened?
absolutely not. You're, no. We'll make sure you're invited this time.
Okay.
All right. Is there any other discussion of the retreat? Is there anything that somebody wished that we could fit into that agenda that we don't have?
I think last month, Ms. Tell mentioned restorative justice, and Ms. Gale mentioned Spanish monitoring.
And do we,
Those may be more work sessions. I don't know how much we can do.
I would recommend having those as work sessions. I'll share a little later kind of the ideas we've had. We brainstormed some work session topics. Restorative justice, for example, is one of them. So that may be better suited for a work session, but.
and that's what I think the next item, well, it's actually the property tax committee, but it's coming up. But we should talk next about what our work session topics should be. But maybe we should first do a report on the property tax study committee, whoever that's going to be.
So I can share kind of what Garrett and Heather and Susan Hurst and I met, and we talked through kind of what are the needs in order to have a committee and where to move forward. And one of the things we identified is that need for some outside expertise that truly understands property tax policy and how it impacts things. And so I will share a copy with you later today, but I started a draft of an RFP to put on a request for proposals. We have some ideas of some people who might have the expertise, but we'll put it out there like a typical RFP process of gathering anyone who might have that expertise who wants to throw their name in the hat. And I've also put together a potential timeline of what that whole RFP process looks like, at what point we can have someone on board, how long they work, when we have community input, and how that feeds into that overall timeline. So I've got printouts of those that I'll give you. I meant to go in here, I don't have them with me, but I'll get those to you. But the idea there is just kind of trying to keep things moving with the expertise that we need to feed into this whole process. So is that a decent summary of what we talked about?
I think that my only additional comment is just that it may be that we should call it the property tax review at this point, since there really isn't an active committee per se. Because committee can, to some people, intone formal meetings at locations and times and places, and not trying to get together over the summer and hash some things out one-on-one.
And I think that is a good point, that the committee technically has not convened. We had a resolution to form the committee at some point, and we're not to that point that we need a committee. At this point, it's still more the pre-planning before you would ever have a committee. It's a great point.
Do we have this in the budget, an RF?
We do not have this worked into the budget, no. So we would have to figure out where that money comes from. But yeah, that's what we have.
And in terms of doing an RFP, I think we've got some folks in the community here who are pretty well versed on that. Dan Utz comes to mind. Am I saying his name right?
It's I think, a different first name.
It's something Utz.
Hans?
Hans, that's what it is. I don't know why I said
I
Dan.
think Heather and I talked about that, and we identified over the summer a number of very talented and experienced individuals in the community. And I think, there's such, if we in-house this, it's going to be easy for people to say that we invented our own wheel and patted ourselves on the back. And I think that by finding the group, an outside group, that has the credentials and the qualifications and the experience to do this kind of work, and then to bring in those individuals in our community to review the work that was done, look at the options, and help us, come up with the best set of options for us to do. I think our work, and I think we envision that happening just a little later, after this initial work was done.
I guess my comment to that would be, if kind of what you're saying is the reason we would do it is to avoid kind of the public appearance that we did this on the inside or something, or people didn't appreciate the process for how we did it. I'm not, that factor is not very enticing for me to want to spend a lot of money
Yeah.
justifying that factor.
It's much more than that. And that was our initial thought that, hey, maybe we could do this. But it is much more complicated than that. And the access to the data is very difficult. And, we've brainstormed many, many questions that we have, and we've already met with Dr. Duty and Ms. Hurst to see if we could answer those questions. And the majority of the questions we were not able to answer. And so after giving this a very hard look, we feel like it is such a significant question. We're talking about millions of dollars, that it is well worth getting it right, and that we really felt that the wisest thing to do was to take a step back and look and see who could be helpful in this equation, who is an expert at this, who, someone who knows this inside and out versus someone who maybe knows a piece of the puzzle. We need someone who can take a holistic look at this, and also someone who would have experience knowing what has been done successfully other places, what our options could be. And then, as Garrett was saying, once we have an expert help us to actually digest what we need to do, what we've gotten right, what we've gotten wrong, what has worked, what has not. There's a lot of analysis that we would like to have done. Then I think it can come to a committee where we can discuss the options that are presented to us and see what works best for Decatur. And that's where I think we can have our Decatur experts come, and other members of this committee that we feel would be, and also community input to see which of these options would work best for Decatur. But it's actually,
It's always
it's
a
so
balancing.
significant that I think it's worth spending the relatively small amount of money to get it right.
Well, so do we have an idea on how much it would cost to do that?
I personally have no idea, so
guess
I
that's
think
just my
it's a
thing,
it's a next step to
Right.
try to figure that out. Yeah,
Some of the, for example, some of the data that we don't have access to is age-related data and some of the income data. And it may be that depending upon who the RFP goes out to, we may actually have people who have access to that data that we would not otherwise have access to, that may not be public data.
And I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I guess I would want to know the I think we have no concept on what this would cost, and so it's probably not productive to talk about it until we know what it's gonna cost. So I'm in favor of kind of getting those numbers and then continuing the discussion once we know what the cost would be.
And it's always a balancing act, because we know that Decatur often, doesn't fit the mold. Some of the studies that are out there that Heather and I looked at are basically county-wide studies. And what affects a county on that scale may not even be appropriate to look at for the microcosm that's Decatur. And so we always struggle with that balance between some, very wide angle look at something versus the Decatur-specific one.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you all.
thank you.
Let's see, next item is a discussion of the board calendar, but really, I think the item, the board work plan. And I think what we need to probably do is, and I don't know if we have sketched in potential
Yeah, so I
topics.
put in the item some potential topics and dates. I've talked to some of you since, and I think there's some desire to potentially move those around, which is fine. But basically, the topics I put in that I've been hearing about, one is the employee grievance and protection. Another is curriculum and instruction. Another is restorative justice. another is safety and security, and then one is policy governance. And that leaves us with 2 more dates that we don't have a topic for yet.
I heard Spanish or world language metrics.
And I think that could probably be incorporated in curriculum instruction, or we could do it separately. Those topics do not have to be presented in that order. That's the order kind of, we've been talking about them, but we can do those in whatever order seems appropriate for the board's desires. Or we can do other topics as well.
I think it would make sense to maybe talk about this briefly at the end of our retreat. Would that, because I feel like we're going to talk about the policy, governance, and some, organizational leadership types of things that I just wonder if, once we do a little bit of groundwork on that, if it would make sense to try to
It'd be fine,
prioritize the
except
other topics.
we will want to set the August topic, because our retreat will come after that one. And maybe talk about September if we don't,
So
if
you
my
have enough
folks
time
don't
to
have the
plan.
time to prep until, because September 8th is the retreat, and then
You're right.
2 weeks later is fall break. So that pushes it a little bit, so we might want to talk about, are there like 2 top priorities that we'd want to push up, and then we could schedule the others?
I would say some of the, so I guess some of these are to me, are kind of tied to policy governance, and that's why I'm kind of wanting to have that discussion first. So maybe we could do for August and September some that are a little less related to, at least what I consider maybe less
I
related
mean,
to policy
safety and
governance.
security would be a really easy
Yeah.
one to move up
Yes.
to August, for
Yeah.
instance, and it would make sense get on top of it early in the year in case there's things we want to do differently this year. That would be a natural one. The restorative justice, we're making quite a bit of progress on, and some of that will probably be related to policy governance, but we could move that up. So those are some potential ones that may be a little less affected by decisions made in policy governance, or things that may not be predictable in that discussion.
I support both of those suggestions. I think my input would also be that safety and security would be my priority to do first, because I feel like it's timely. Beginning of the year, we have a lot of new hires. We have still newer buildings that we want to make sure we, have fully implemented everything. And we did have work that was being done over the summer. It's a good opportunity to circle back and make sure all of that was done and see what else might be left to do. So I feel like that one's very timely. And second, I feel like restorative justice is a high priority, and also the sooner we can do that one in this school year, the more we'll benefit from it this school year.
One thing that I hope we can get to before the end of the year, and it's definitely not on the top of this list here, is perhaps finding some of the leaders in the competency, mastery, personalized learning areas, and taking a field trip and seeing what does it look like when this is implemented well. I think, if you want to see what's going to be crammed down the throat of public education, go look at California and Texas, right? If it happens there, it's going to be pushed down. But often I look towards the New England states, New York, Massachusetts, I think New Hampshire, if you want to see where some of the new emerging best practices are. And I think there's also, New York has something called the Mastery Collaborative, which I'm trying to spend some time digging into. And there's also a group called Competency Works, which I think has a number of schools on it that actually have scheduled times when they show people around. So if we can find a couple of those exemplars and find out when they welcome people to their doors, it'd be nice if we could line up something so that some of us could
work on
go.
finding some of those so you can at least have a discussion about whether or not you want to do that.
So I take Annie's point that we should figure this stuff out maybe at the board meeting, but I'm interested,
Are we comfortable with those first 2,
Yeah,
saying
that's
in
good.
August, let's do safety, security?
Sure.
September, restorative justice, and the rest we'll figure out at the board retreat?
I am curious, though, if people just wanted to sort of stream of consciousness, throw out other topics, just that we have kind of a basket of ideas to think about. I, for one, am interested, we've talked a lot about the SCLT, and that you're doing some work to sort that out and figure out its function and role. And I think another work session on that at some point would be appropriate.
Okay.
Just to throw one out. Anything else that anybody just wants to?
I would do another, I mean, maybe it's not a work session, well, it's not a work session, these are just like 2-hour time slots, but I'll just go ahead and register that I'd like to do another, the next level of Beyond Diversity training.
Okay. Yep.
And maybe get, if we have it here, GSBA.
And I am planning to have a GSBA rep at our board retreat, so we can get credit for the training and not have that whole fiasco again.
Okay. Is there anything else? Let's see. Future business, I think we just did future business. We do have a,
Future business, we'll actually start calling it, we should be calling it future dates. We just haven't updated our template.
oh, so I'm supposed to read some dates?
No, it's just dates that people might want to be aware of, so.
Okay. We do have a need for an executive session to discuss personnel issues and legal matters. Do we have a vote?
And we do not anticipate any actions at the conclusion of that.
We do not anticipate taking a vote, so do we have a vote to go into executive session?
So moved.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so we'll adjourn into executive session, whatever we say. All right, thanks, everybody.
Work sessions start at 6:30, right? Is that a normal 6:30 start time for us?
We've been,
Has it been later than
I
that?
thought we were starting at 7 for work
Was it
session.
The
7?
session was, that'd be awfully nice.
I think we were doing like 7 to 9,
Okay.
if I remember correctly.
What is the intention of these?
Start time.